Hey, welcome, and thank you for listening to or watching the Focus Forward Business Podcast. I am Sturdy McKee, a business coach and advisor, and your host for the podcast. So today I'm really pleased to bring you Marko Gargenta. I've known Marko for a long time through EO, that's Entrepreneurs Organization here in San Francisco. We were both members for, I don't know, I joined 15 years ago. I think you were right there around the same time.
Yeah.
But I'm going to let Marko tell you a little bit more about himself. But first, thank you very, very much for being here, Marko.
Oh, great. Thanks for having me, Study.
Cool.
How far back do you want to start?
Well, let's go with current first. Who are you and what do you do? What's your current role in business and stuff? And then we'll go back.
Yeah, so I'm currently a founder, CEO of a startup called Plus. And so what we exist to help unleash ingenuity of people in a workplace. And with this vision of like work is where you go and to grow. And how we do that is through an enterprise learning platform that we built for innovative companies. So that's kind of that's what I do today. But to really understand how I fell into that, it's like probably better to kind of look at the previous company.
Yeah, please.
And there's a little bit of a journey. So prior to Plus, I was at Twitter, and I was building Twitter University. So, and the reason why I was at Twitter is that Twitter acquired my company that you knew me through at EO way back when. So Twitter acquired us. We got in-house to build Twitter University, and the idea was that we were going to help engineers, with getting better at their work so they can produce features faster and do their best work, right? Mm-hmm. And so I thought going in that I was just going to be teaching a bunch of classes on things that I knew, right? And then what I realized is that people internally did not care about this, what I call vanilla knowledge, right? Like it wasn't about like, how do you do Java? How do you do Android? It was more about how does Twitter work and how do we work at Twitter? It was about this internal tribal knowledge. And I was like, oh, shoot, they just spent all this money on us, right? And here we are, and we're the least qualified to answer how Twitter works or how we work at Twitter because we just got in, right? Like I have zero understanding of any of that. So how am I going to go around teach, old timers on these things? It's kind of like upside down. So we then thought about that and we said, well, I think the better approach would be if we enable people to learn from one another. So that's kind of what we created this, what we now call peer learning. We created a system where people learn from one another. Mm-hmm. Not that, unlike what we do in EO, right? Where we learn as founders, entrepreneurs from one another. So anyway, we studied this at Twitter. It worked magically well. And then my insight was, well, if it works at Twitter, let's create that elsewhere as well. And so that's why I left 5 years ago, started Plus. And so now, what's a little bit unusual is that as a startup, our very first customer was Salesforce. So usually start small and you go up.
Right.
We started up and we're like, how do we get this small guys? So that was like a little bit unusual. It's been a wild ride, very enjoyable one since.
Well, let's go way back to, your first business. Tell us a little bit about how you got that started and what you may wish that you have done differently at that point in time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I started, I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, right? Like now in my mid 40s, I only had one job, right? And that was Twitter, right? So I started, so way back in the .com days, I started a software company, raised money, tanked it. So that was a sort of like an experience I had before I was legally able to drink, right? So that was kind of interesting. And then I kind of got burnt through .com and lived scrappily in San Francisco on sort of credit cards and mac and cheese. And then I saw this ad in a paper. Well, we started a bar business, bar gallery on the side. But then I saw this ad in a paper and it was for a nonprofit. It was basically this organization called OpNet that was helping underprivileged youth, minorities, and inner city kids get technology jobs, right? So if you think about it, like it was basically the kids whose trajectory in life was to flip burgers or steal car stereos for a living, right? suddenly they were able to like learn in those days, like it was like HTML, JavaScript, ActionScript, like all these technologies. And suddenly, they go through a mini class and they walk away, experts and like freelancers and billing 40, $50 an hour and like feeling like rock stars about that, right? Like, which was so not in their path of like in their life path. And so I realized like, wow, this is so enjoyable to actually through education change somebody's life. Like it's very, very few things can have that impact, and education is one. And I really enjoy doing that, but it was like the work that I did in the evenings and weekends at a nonprofit. And then a buddy of mine is like, hey, you can do this corporate. I'm like, what do you mean? Like companies pay to do training? I was like, I was clueless, right? Like I've never been in a large organization. So he's like, yeah. So like, okay, we put up a website and got calls. Like, William Sonoma was like a first customer, Bureau of Land Management, federal government and so on.
Yeah.
So it's like, wow, this is cool. So we built this company. It was a services company, and we built it for, I want to say, 5 to 7 years. And then, one of our customers happened to be Twitter, and then they approached us about the acquisition. So that was sort of the end of that journey. Yeah.
When you told us a little bit about how you transitioned from Twitter when you left there to Plus Plus, I don't think you told us everything though, because I remember we were out on a sailboat in San Francisco Bay 5+ years ago, and you were just starting this because you want to fill that in?
Yeah, so Twitter was going, so when I joined Twitter, it was a peacetime Twitter. It was pre-IPO. Everything was like, hey, let's invest in people, culture, this and that. And then as we became a publicly traded company, it became what I refer to it as a wartime company. It became more like, hey, we need to meet our numbers, and it became a different place, a less fun place.
Sure.
And ultimately, I left sooner than I thought I was gonna. I was gonna be there 4 years. I left after 2, and then I was sort of not sure what. I didn't have a plan, right? Because it was my plan was to leave it 4 years and then make a plan, right? And I was like, what do I do now? And so yes, we were sailing, and then I started bumming around. I was like, I actually, for the first time, have a little bit of a leeway, a runway, to figure out what is that I want to do, right? And my previous company, I sort of fell into it. I was like, I just wanted to be my own boss, and I'll do anything. And I was just grabbing into any opportunity. So it was very opportunistic and less strategic. And I didn't know anything about values and purpose and all these other things that we later on learned through you.
Right.
So, for the first time when after Twitter, I was I had the time and place and to think about that. What do I want to do? What's the next 10 years going to look like? Because that's how long usually these journeys are, right? And what do I care about, right? Like, so I spent a lot of time tinkering through that. And first I was like, I'm just not going to do anything. I'll just like bum around. And there's I remember as an entrepreneur, there's always like this sort of carrot, like you build a business so you can sell it, so you can do nothing, right? And I was like, wow, I'm sort of there, like now what? And it was exciting for the first week or two. And then you realize that like, wait, but like I would go to gym in the middle of the day and I'd be the only guy, under 65 who's like working out at like 2 p.m. on a Thursday, right? Right. And it became sort of weird. Like, honestly, I was bored. Like I was trying to figure out, hey, who else is available? Everyone else has a job, up to something, right? And it came to a point I was like, are there any bars that are open at like 2 p.m. on a Thursday, right? I was like, oh shit, like I'm going down the wrong path. Like I need a project, right? So it was like, seriously, it's a sort of like, I know it sounds sexy to like, have an exit, but it's also a very dangerous place. And I've seen, I'm part of the EOMIT program. gathering of titans and all that. And I've seen a lot of stories of people just going off the rails, going to the dark side after such events.
Well,
So
Tony Hsieh was an example of that.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
After, I mean, an extreme example, but yeah.
Yeah. And it's a thing. It happens.
Yeah.
So then I was like, okay, well, I need a project. I need something. And that's when I started kind of pondering, what do I do? And then everyone's like, and so what I was doing is I was talking to a lot of people. Like, I was like, okay, there's all these itches we have. Like, for me, it was like, oh, what if I did hardware? Like, that's kind of sexy. Or what if I did investing? Everyone's a VC, right? Or what if I did, this and that? And I started like probing my itches by talking to a lot of people. I did a lot of coffee meetings and, with friends and so on.
Right.
Different industries. And everyone tells you like, oh, just follow your passion. Like, great. But what is my passion? Like, how do you actually get to that? Right. And it's like, I was like, oh shit.
Or
like,
which one?
Exactly. Because, I thought like, oh, when I have freedom, I'll just open up the book. Oh, there's my passion and this is what I do. But it's, how do you actually get to that? And that I was struggling. I was like wrestling with that for a while. Like, what's my passion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So tell us about your current stage though, because something exciting just happened with you at Plus Plus.
Yeah, so when I started Plus Plus, I sort of, first time I started the company by design, meaning I designed it around what I wanted to feel like for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so so what that meant was I sort of imagined like what are all the moving pieces, and one of the design criteria I had was I was not going to raise money, right? Because I wanted to optimize for my own experience, my own journey, right? As opposed to at least that was the thought I had back then, that I was gonna, if I raise money, then that's a double-edged sword. I had all this like dialogue about that because other than in college days, I never really raised any money for a business, right? So that meant I bootstrapped the company for the first 4 years, right? And then it became a little lonely. Like I was, it was just me with a bunch of, people working for me. I didn't have partners. I had limited resources, and it wasn't as fun. And so then, but I was still mentally struggling with getting investors. Mm-hmm. So my coach at the time said, well, why don't you do a safe test? Like, what would be a safe test? Like, what would be a way for you to test out what does it feel like to have investors, right? Because you obviously have all these like internal conversations, dialogues about that. And I was like, that's a good point. Well, okay, I'll go to my forum and a couple of people I know. Like I'm part of Sand Hill Angels, so I go to my own angel group, and so ask my own friends basically, would they invest? And they said yes. And so last year, about a year ago, we raised about $1 million from what we call the friends and family round. So it was basically on a safe note. And I loved it because A, I discovered that people are super supportive. B, they challenged me in a way that I needed to get my stuff together to like reporting and updates and being accountable to others. And it was actually like, it was like kind of kick my butt in a good way, right? So I was like, okay, this is, and not because they were doing that, but because I sort of felt an obligation to do that. It's different than like doing it solo. Put some external pressure, which I needed. It's kind of like committing to somebody else. So that was great. And then later this last year, I started exploring, well, what would it take to actually raise, institutional money, right? And then we started pounding the pavement. So it was great, like, people who knew me invested in me, but what about people who don't know me, who do this for a living, right? They would need to do it on the merits of this is a meaningful business, right?
Right.
And so so I started, pounding the pavement, and eventually we just recently closed our first VC round. So
awesome.
so that's kind of, so that's kind of and to me, it was as an entrepreneur, I wanted to have that notch on a belt that like I learned how to raise money, which I never did before. So that was a great experience. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Well, congratulations on that. On to
Thank
the
you.
next phase, huh?
Yeah.
So with all this, I know one of the many things that we've seen that I see all the time is entrepreneurs, business owners being challenged with getting things done and having enough time. What advice would you give business owners around that who are struggling with not having enough time? What have you learned to do?
Well, so I mean, we all have exactly the same amount of time, right? 24 hours in a day, right?
Exactly.
So, so time is there. It's not really about time. It's about the priorities, right? So how do you manage priorities? There's this book that I always refer to. It's called The One Thing.
Mm-hmm.
The One Thing. It's by the Keller Williams real estate guys. So anyway, he talks about like every morning starting with the inquiry of like, what is the one thing that by doing this, what is the most important thing that by doing this one thing, everything else is going to become easier or not necessary. So I sort of like try to meditate on that, like each day, like what's the one thing? Like forget the to-do list or gazillion things. What's the one thing? So that gives me some clarity on priorities, like what's the most important thing, right? That's one thing I do. The other thing is also kind of auditing the calendar. So like, if you look at our lives and if you want to do them by design, if I say that like, business and family and community and self or equally matter, well, what does my calendar say about that? Like, am I putting my time allotment for family, for community, for self, right? So that's another way to kind of audit the calendar. And I try to, I try to sort of time box my concerns, right? So for example, I'm 9 to 5 at work, but I don't do work after 5. I don't check emails or do stuff on the weekends because that's now time boxed to family. At the same time, I'm not on social media 9 to 5 or doing, answering personal call. Like I don't do anything else at that time. So that's kind of how I time box it and manage it.
Okay. So time boxing, prioritization, but I love the one thing. I've read that book too. I think it's so, to your point, we all have the same amount of time. What are you spending it on? And what do you need to be spending it on? Right? Because other people will come and things will come up and there are tons of distractions. Yeah. Lots of things you could do. Cool. Yeah. So what challenges are you currently facing? I mean, you're onto a new phase with Plus Plus. What's your next hurdle, obstacle, goal that you're going to be working to overcome or achieve?
Yeah, I think as founders, one of the key things is like how fast we learn, right? And I think that's like super important. So like, we are an enterprise SaaS company, and so there's sort of like there's a journey, there's a path that's been walked many times before. So it's like, you build a product, you achieve product market fit, you achieve go-to-market fit, you become a category leader, and that's sort of the arc. And so I've been always like kind of having that overarching arc in mind, and we sort of, we got our product market fit. And so we are now trying to figure out how do we go to market and like, what's the fit of that? And then, so that's the current sort of milestone that I'm grappling with a lot. And then if you unpack that, there's a whole bunch of stuff, right? Like how do we prospect? How do we sell? How do we close? How do we onboard and so on? In that sort of box of stuff, we just kind of unpacked like how do we do prospecting, but now it's like, okay, how do we get people? This part of a journey is a big ask. Like if the step is too big, how do we make that step a bunch of smaller, steps? So that's what I'm sort of unpacking and working on, and it's one of, keeps me up at like, not keeps me up at night, but it's top of mind. Like I think about it a lot, but at the same time, I'm super like, if I pull myself out, I'm grateful for the opportunity of like, just learning, like figuring it out, right? Because once I figure it out, I'll get somebody to replace me. But it's really that first, how does this thing, like looking at the machinery and like, how does this one thing work? And like, why is it stuck here? And how do we unstuck it and make it better?
Right.
So, yeah. It's kind of.
I love that. Yeah. So solving the puzzle and stuff. And that's a great share too. I appreciate that because I think, I encounter this, so many business owners think that they're the only one facing the current challenge or what they're dealing with, and they're kind of isolated. And here you are, you've had, multiple modes to your journey, right? And going and exiting, working for Twitter, starting a new one, now raising money. And there are a lot of people who look at you and go, oh, he's got it all figured out. But there's always a new challenge, right?
Oh yeah, I mean it's so humbling, right? Like it's
Yeah.
there's always like the next, somebody's always smarter, more, there's always like the next level, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I now I have the VCs that I talk to, and now they challenge me, right?
Mm-hmm.
They push me, they ask me stuff, and I feel like a total beginner, right? And it's super humbling, right? But my mindset there is that like I welcome it, and I'm grateful for being challenged. Like it's a great opportunity. So yeah, but it's intentional, right? Like I was getting back to the being bored. Like bootstrap this business. I did not necessarily need to go down the path of raising money. It could have been a lifestyle thing, but then it'd be boring, right? Like I would not be challenged. For me, like, at least, I would not be challenged. I would be like, sort of like, what am I doing here? It's like same old. Like, how do I get to the next level? Like that's what drives me personally, right? And one of my so that achiever aspect of it. But reflecting back on EO, right? So you mentioned how you and I met a gazillion years ago. I want to say it was 2007 for me. And I remember I was just building my own first business. I didn't know anything about what I was doing. I just knew I wanted to be in the business myself, right? So, and I didn't know anybody to talk to, right? Like it's not my girlfriend, or the time. It's not my friends who like don't have, like, who do you go to? And then somebody introduced me to EO. And I remember coming to the chapter event, and I was like, holy cow, like this is like my people, like this is my tribe. Like
Right.
it was really cool. Like it was a really amazing, eye-opening, like, wow, there's a community for this. So
Right.
yeah.
No, that's a great point. I was the same way. I was stuck, like, my wife was tired of hearing me talk about it. My friends who had jobs and stuff didn't get it. There were really a limited number of people who I could reach out or talk to, or, share the stresses, the struggles with, or whatever. And then, I walked in the first EO event and it was like, so I now have people, as a management book read The Saggy Baggy Elephant. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you should check it out because it's your total EO journey. And it's finding your tribe. It's finding your, I use it instead of Hire for Fit because it's a lot more entertaining and shorter. But yeah, it's that whole idea of you're looking for those folks that you can really talk to, right, and resonate with and stuff. So encourage anybody to get involved with that, or if you're feeling isolated, or reach out. We'll connect you with some of the those resources and stuff too. But let's switch to more of a positive one. What is your proudest moment so far in your entrepreneurial career?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. There's a weird way, in a weird way. One of the proud moments was us saying no to Twitter, which not a lot of people know about. So let me explain that. So they approached us about acquisition, right? And many, by the time, like we were about like 5 million in sales, we would randomly get, people hitting us up about, random like PE firms and things like that,
Sure.
or competitors. And we'll be like, hell no, like, just leave us alone. But then Twitter was like, hey, we want to explore this. And first I was like, wow, this is like entrepreneurial dream come true, right?
Sure.
But then once we started sort of unpacking that, what that meant, at that time, it was my brother and I, we owned the business 100%. We were doing well, cash flow wise. We, had all the freedom, all the money, everything in the world, right? And here along comes Twitter, like the dream sort of come true, but it'd be like, you have to give all that up, okay? And now you're gonna be CEO -5 on your org chart, right? So like, right, so you controlled and owned and fully understood something, and you're gonna replace that with a bag of stock that is, at that time was private, which you have no control, you have no idea what value of that is, if you're getting screwed or if it's actually fair. Like, and I always had this dream they would just give me a bag of cash and say thank you, and I would go somewhere in the Caribbean and like it doesn't
work that
way. No, it just, they give you a bunch of stock, and I was like, what do I do with this, right? Like, now I have a salary, like it wasn't even covering my expenses at the time. I was like, so there was a lot of reasons. It's not just financial, but also I was like, why would I, like, now that I looked into this dream, I was like, it actually is kind of like a nightmarish, right? Like, why would they do this? And we actually said no to them, not once, but a couple of times, because and it was gonna be just like sort of like nobody's ever gonna know about this because it was like confidential at the time.
Sure.
And we would just forever live with this fact that we declined this offer, right? And my brother and I felt good about that choice. But then they kept pushing us, and ultimately why I had to see, and what they did is they had me talk to a lot of internal people, right? Other entrepreneurs they acquired and so on. And what I had to see, what you put finances on a side because it's murky and hard to predict the future and how things are going to work out. So you just kind of cancel that out. So then it was like, okay, what's my journey? And on one option is like I continue on the journey that's familiar, right? I keep building my business and I sort of know where that's going and what I'll learn and what I'll meet and my experiences. On the other hand, I would go down this rabbit hole. I would meet amazing people, learn a lot about how organizations at scale works, and see how to impact 1 billion people, right? Like, and so those are the things ultimately that resonated with me, right? Like impacting 1 billion people, seeing large company and internals of it, and then meeting a lot of very, very smart people. And so that's what I went for. But it was totally this like, the Matrix, when you get red pill, blue pill, it was totally that experience. Like blue pill, you wake up and none of this ever happened. Red pill, you're gonna go like Alice in a Wonderland, right? Like you're off the rails, you're like on to a journey, and like you don't know what's behind the mirror, right? And so it was scary, it was wild, it was all these emotions, but ultimately I'm glad I did it, and I'm glad I did it because I had those 3 things clear what I wanted to get out of it. So it wasn't about money, but it was about learning and being, meeting people and seeing things. So
you jumped through the looking glass.
Yeah.
Finally.
Exactly.
After saying no a few times.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. And that's awesome too, because yeah, you're right. People don't hear, they hear the best version of, the abbreviated story, right? Not the whole thing. So very cool.
I think that's a thing just in Silicon Valley in general, right? Like we tend
Sure.
to see, it's kind of like social media. We just see the positive side, right? Like you read TechCrunch and you're like, oh, success here, like all that. But there's a lot of sort of like failures along the way, so they're not celebrated or talked about. So yeah.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, and I've sat at conferences with people who are on stage talking about their greatest success that I talked to last week about the challenges and the things that they had going on. And, I'm just sitting there going, you got to share that stuff too, man. Because there's so many, because we do, it's rainbows and unicorns and it looks awesome. And we're sitting there, beating ourselves up about why can't I figure it out? It's like everybody's dealing with something, but that's awesome. I love that story. Thank you. So what's one of the biggest things you've learned recently that you wish you had known like 10 years ago?
Raising money, definitely. And so if you kind of think about like a lot of at least these are some stories that I have in my mind, right? Like I sort of grew up on the whole, like a lot of us in EO were sort of like self-made, build businesses,
Sure.
that we fully own, and did it, traditional businesses and so on. And I always had this sort of like, that's the right way, and forget this whole Silicon Valley, raising money thing. Like I was opposed to it because I had all these conversations in my head, how that's going to rob me of freedom, that's going to rob me of my experience, that's just like having a job, etc., etc. There was some internal dogmas that I was dealing with around that, and so stepping through that, again, safe test with friends and family, and then institutional. Yeah, that was what I learned last year, and it was like, it feels good. Like it's kind of like a notch in a belt. Like I've been an entrepreneur all my life, and finally now I actually know how to like raise money. I should have done that like 20 years ago, right? So that's just kind of felt like, okay, I know how to amplify my story now through the ability to raise cash. So yeah.
Cool, thanks. So what's a favorite business book or article or something you're reading or learning right now that you'd like to share?
Well, so right now I'm reading The Leader Within Us, which is Warren Rustan's book. He's also my mentor. So I love that, and I love his philosophy. And he also had me read two other books, The Leader Within and True North. Which are both leadership books that sort of, it's less about like how do you manage, it's more about how do you go deeper inside of you and really figure out who you are and why you do what you do, and then create this channel where that kind of resonates out of you externally. And that's kind of like, there's some fundamental truth to that approach to leadership. And so I enjoy those books.
Cool, thanks for sharing that. So any other thoughts before we wind down that you'd like to leave folks with?
I mean, I just, I think it's a journey. It's a state of mind. It's this whole thing, why we do what we do. And I just don't know how to do anything. Like, yeah, it's sort of like, I just feel it like that's what I need to do. And that's why, we're entrepreneurs, right?
Right. It's just something within, innate.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, thanks for saying this succinctly. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Marko. I really appreciate it. People are going to get a lot out of it. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.